Hello, everyone, and welcome. This is Charles McNeely, and it is an honor, and I'm deeply privileged to be here in the home of Dr. Robert Welborn, who is going to share his memories and his experiences of the family farm. What parish is it in now?
It's in Beauregard Parish.
Beauregard Parish, thank you. So, Dr. Welborn, thank you for having me here, and you are the 61st person, the second person this year that I'm recording, and based on when I came here a couple of weeks ago to meet you, I have had wonderful experiences with everybody I've recorded, but I am so looking forward to this because of your sense of humor and just your depth of knowledge that I'm very curious about, and also love the way you've approached life that I learned about whenever I spoke to you earlier. So let's begin. You sent me a few things that you wanted to talk about, and the first one on the list was the early years of the farm. Can you tell us, how old was Papa when he purchased the farm?
Well, excuse me, he was approximately about 22 years old. And I'd like to go back and tell you about where the farm is.
Absolutely.
The farm is approximately 3.5 miles northeast of Longville. And so Papa, or my father, he graduated from college. And whenever he graduated from college, he went to teaching at Longville. He went to teaching at Longville, and he rode his horse over to Longville every day.
What grade did he teach?
I do not know. He had a degree in agriculture, and so consequently, I'd say it was probably agriculture.
I would imagine. And where did he graduate from?
He graduated from LSU.
In Baton Rouge, not any of the other satellite places. Okay.
And but anyway, he was first a teacher there, and the Baptist encampment is over Dry Creek, right. And that he was staying over there while he was teaching at Longville, and he'd ride his horse over there every day, which is about 10 miles. Well, undoubtedly, he found out that there was some land for sale on the way over there, and he bought 120 acres. It was in 1927 that he bought the property, and I figured that he probably saw this property, and he went and talked to a fella. It was a Ken Cagle that owned the property, and excuse me, and but anyway, he paid $27.50 an acre for the property, which is $3,300, and so he borrowed the money from a bank, and it took him 9 years to pay that off. And so that's how the farm started. And before that, before he bought it, or before Mr. Cagle had it, it was the Frugier family had the farm, and they acquired that piece of property in 1915. The old house that was originally there was probably built by them somewhere in 1915 or a year or two after.
The original house?
The original house that was there. Okay. And the house, the only thing, what it was comprised of, it had 3 bedrooms and had a living room with a little small fireplace in it. And then to the back of it was a kitchen area where they had a place where they ate. Then they had a kitchen where they had a wood stove. There was no utilities, no running water. They had a shallow well at the end of the porch that they had a bucket, and they'd dip down in that well, and that's where they got their water from. And so the house was made out of longleaf pine. It was virgin timber, and so it was a real compact grain on it, and it also had a lot of rosin in it. And the house survived. The house burnt down probably in maybe the 50s, but in between that time, nothing was done to it, and it was still in good shape because the lumber was so good and it had a lot of rosin in it. Yes. But the first buildings were that house, and then what we call there was a horse barn there, and that was the two first buildings on the property.
And did you say they built or Papa built?
No. There's the Frugier. The Frugiers built. This was in 1915 or 16, okay. And Papa, he didn't acquire the property until 1927. Okay. And but that was the beginning of it. And so he bought it, and his family always had cattle and sheep, and of course that's the reason he had a degree in agriculture. And y'all ask about what his vision was. I'm sure his vision was that he wanted a farm, and he wanted the cattle and sheep, and which he did have. Nice. And in the meantime, there were some barns built there to share sheep with, and I do not know at what time that they were built, but they had to be built in the 30s, more than likely. Okay. And of course, another thing that was during that time, it was all what they call open range. There were no fences, yes. And everything was open. The timber had been cut, and all that was left was pine stumps and these little creek beds with trees on them. And you could see for miles sometime, but this was all open range, clear down to Longville and to Ragley. Gotcha. And so people had a lot of sheep then, and the sheep roamed out in the woods, and so it was a big thing about getting the sheep up during the summertime and sharing them. And but they had these sheep barns there, and they would bring in these sheep, and there'd be as many as 5,000 head of sheep there at a time early on.
How many people were working on them?
It was probably 4 or 5 families of people that were there, and of course and I can remember as a young child going out there, and there'd be horses tied up to the fence. There may be 15 or 20 horses there tied up to the fence that people had that they were gathering the sheep. There was a place out in front of the old house that was it may have been 2 or 3 acres big, and of course Ted and Diana and Cindy, we always call it the stump.
Now, I had a question about it, but Ted and Diana, that's your nephew?
That's nephew and nieces, and Cindy. And
what's stump? What is that?
Well, that's what I was going to tell you about. Is that they have all these sheep, and they'd bring them in, and they'd put them in there and put them together real tight where they couldn't move around very much. Yes. And they'd stand there until they got ready to move them into the barns to share them. Well, those sheep were standing there stomping their feet all the time to get the flies off of them. And so they call that the stomp. And so, because there's always stomping around out there.
I get the name now, and I understand. I used to work cattle with my uncles, and they kind of did the same thing. They put them in a very compact area. I don't remember them stomping, but I get the image.
No, sheep would do that. But anyway, that was a big deal there for a number of years. And of course, whenever they started reforesting the country, well, they started putting up fences, and where the open range was no more, and so consequently you do not see any sheep anymore. Yeah. And because it takes a fairly good big area for a sheep, because they eat the grass down very lowly. But that was the beginning of things right there. Love, there was a black man called Love, and Love had to come fairly early, and I would say that probably in the 1930s, that Love probably moved there on the farm, and he had a wife named Bess, and Bess was a great cook, And whenever me and my sister, which Ted's mother was Molly, we'd go down there. Well, she always had on this wooden stove, wood burning stove, where she always had tea cakes on top of that stove, and so that was a big thing, is to go eat tea cakes every time that you went down there. And but she was a very good cook, and I ate with them a lot as a young child. My father and mother, they thought a lot of them, and they would leave me there if they went somewhere, and I would stay there, and you know, we ate
Quite well.
well, we ate good. You know, they raised their vegetables and what have you, and they'd kill a raccoon every once in a while, and we had raccoon to eat, in which it tastes kind of like chicken.
Yes,
Yeah, and so it wasn't bad at all.
When did Papa meet love? Do you remember how?
It had to be in the 30s. Whenever Papa, he was a county agent in the early 30s. And I would imagine that somewhere in there is when Love first came down there. And Love lived in this original house, and like I say, as long as he was there.
Yes. Did he have any education, do you know?
Did not have any education, but I guess that I learned more from him than I did anyone. You know, basic things about working. I would go down there and supposedly help him, but he was always teaching me how to do something. And of course, we had no power tools, and everything was done by hand, and we had a crosscut saw that you had to cut wood with. Well, they needed a lot of wood because their stove was run on wood, and then they had wood for the fireplace. And of course, when you had a crosscut saw and one man on either end. Well, sometimes I wouldn't pull as much as Love thought I ought to pull, and so Love would tell me that he was going to come around there and whip me if I didn't start pulling that saw. And so, anyway, he was very gentle. They never allowed me to say a bad word. If they did, they really got on me about that, and you never heard them say a bad word. And so. It was me and him hunted and fished. We'd go down and we used to trap. We trapped mink and otter and fox, and then we'd sell the hides in Lake Charles. And so I have very good memories of all that, and of him teaching me how to. They had a lot of quail during that time. The quail, sometimes they'd be 40 and 50 in a covey, and you know, you'd go hunt them, and he had a dog that was part bird dog that we'd shoot them. And then my mother liked quail, and I probably shouldn't tell this, but I will go ahead and tell it. And that she had a friend that they said, you ought to trap some of those quail. And so she got a trap, and so she would trap quail, and she'd go get them, and then she'd bring them up to the house, and whenever they had built a little house there, and she would fry those quail and have milk, gravy, and rice, and it was delicious. Oh. And of course, she said that it wasn't legal, but we should go ahead and eat it, though. So
if something tastes that good, yes, you can.
Yeah. So anyway, I guess at this period of time we can talk about something a little illegal. but anyway, the other people that were involved there was a black man named H.L. and H.L. was he was there early on when I was very young, and of course Love, he went to town on Saturday night because he needed something to drink. And so H.L. had a panel truck, and H.L. would come get him and carry him to town. And so one Sunday morning, about 5 o'clock in the morning, there was a beating on the door, and so H.L., Daddy went to the door, and it was H.L. He said, "What do you want this time of morning?" He said, "Well," said Mr. Love is in jail in Jasper. He said, "In Jasper?" Said, "Yeah." Said, "He got to drinking and got over to Jasper, and they put him in jail." And so he said, well, let's go see about it. So they go to Jasper. It was right at daylight, and there was nobody around, so they didn't know where Love was. And so H.L. said, well, what we going to do? Papa said, well, I know what to do. He said, he always had a cattle call where he called the cows, go, woo, woo cow. And so anyway, they got out there in the middle of town, and he started calling like a cow, and the first thing you knew, you heard Love answer him, woo, over this. So they found out where Love was and got him out of jail and brought him back home. And so,
thank you for that story. That is amazing.
Anyway,
that's quite a distance to travel for a drink. I don't know.
Anyway, but H.L. was he was another just gentle fellow, big heavy guy. He wore a size 50-30 coveralls. That was a 50 waist and a 30 length. And so, but H.L. was, as time went on, as I got older and I'd go to college and got out of school and got to have cattle down there myself, well, H.L. would come down and help me. And of course, he'd gotten older. But H.L. was, one day I really got mad about something and said some unpleasant things. He said, Robert, said, you cannot do that. I said, what do you mean I can't do that? He said, don't you know when you get mad, you get sick? I said, really? I said, did you ever get mad? I did one time, and I got sick, and I haven't gotten mad since then.
A wise man, definitely.
But anyway, very, very physical man, and like I say, he was a pleasure to be around, and he was always willing to come work, and do things.
It's wonderful to have somebody like him in Love that has showed you so much about growing up. And
they were really good people. Is all I can say, the best I can say about them.
I did have a question from one of your family members about did Love's house burn at some point?
He did. I guess it had to be probably in the 50s. It could have been a little late 50s, and that it burnt. And what happened is that he had this small fireplace, and of course they used kindling wood, which was heart pine that you got out of the woods, and it really burnt hot and it had a big flame. And he built too big a fire in the fireplace one night, and it caught the house on fire. And of course, the house being built of the pine lumber with the rosin in it, well, it just went up in flames immediately. Going back to Love a little bit, whenever I would go down there, we played dominoes all the time, and checkers, and especially checkers. And but I could hardly ever beat Love in checkers. As much as I'd try to figure out, and so anyway, I went off to college in first year, and then I came back one time, and so I went down, and me and Love played checkers. And so Love, he beat me again in checkers. He said, well, don't look like that education is doing you much good, does it? and so anyway, those were good times.
Great men, definitely. Okay. Let's see, some more questions about Love's. You talked about, I don't know if you mentioned something about this, about having running water in the house. There was no running water.
No running water.
Okay.
And there was no electricity early on.
Okay.
I think later on they probably got electricity there, got some basic lights, but there was never running water, and there was still always a wood burning stove.
Got you. Wood burning stove and a well. Right. Pretty much. Okay. How old was Love when he had to move back to DeRidder?
I really don't know. We all think, I can't believe I'm as old as I am. I used to think, well, people my age, boy, they were gone. But at the time, I was young, and so Love, he could have been 60 years old, or he could have been 65. He moved back to DeRidder, and he lived in kind of the north end of town with other black people. And so anyway, my father was he was working for BCA there in town. He had an office at the end of the street and close, not too far from where Love was staying. And so one day Love came into Daddy's office and said, "Well," said Mr. Yule said, "I've got a problem." Said every time I get my Social Security check, said this man comes by and takes that check from me. And said, I've been without money here for 2 months now. And said, you got to tell me what to do. So Daddy or Papa, he said, "Love," said, "do you remember that? You still got that 20 gauge shotgun that I gave you?" He said, "Yes, sir, I sure do." He said, "Well, I tell you what, I'd get that 20 gauge shotgun out and get after that guy. And I wouldn't let him take my money." So anyway, they let that go. And about a month or two later, well, the lady come in there and said, "Oh, Mr. Yule," said, "you got to come see about Mr. Love." Said, "Mr. Love's shooting up the quarters down here." So they got in the car and went down there and said, went there, and Love's sitting on the porch with his gun. You know, he said, "Love, what in the world are you doing?" He said, "Well, I'm doing just what you told me to do." Said, "That man came to try to steal my check, and I got the shotgun out and I've been shooting."
Oh my God.
And so anyway, Love took care of his problem then.
Definitely, yes. I'm glad he was able to. The last question that we have for Love is, what did he teach you? What did he learn? Oh. Did you learn from him the most?
Oh, I tell you, I guess I learned character for one thing. That you're supposed to act right, and that was a big thing of him and his wife Bess, and that another thing was he taught me how to hunt and fish and walk in the woods and be quiet, and that was a big deal. Is that we would walk everywhere in the woods to the south and back there, and his thing was that you step lightly. You do not step on anything and make any noise. And so consequently, and had a trap but had to care for things, had to sharpen a knife, and had to use tools because everything was by hand, no power tools. But you think back at the time, you don't realize what you're learning from a person like that. And it was learned a lot from him.
Yeah, so it sounds like you went to school to learn there, and you came home and you learned a lot more.
Oh yeah.
And that's wonderful. Great man, and he and HL, I think, were very. That's wonderful. We want to remember them, definitely. Okay. You one of the topics you put down was the old house and the barn. One of the questions was, when was the tin barn built? Do you remember that?
Well, the old house and the barn are not the same thing as the tin barn.
Okay.
My father, he was in between jobs, and it was at the end of the 40s, and he built a packing house or a slaughterhouse down there. And they brought cattle in there and butchered them, and then they sold them to restaurants and places that grocery stores. And that burnt down after about, I think, 3 years or so, and then it was rebuilt at one time. Again, probably in the early 50s there, that it was rebuilt as a barn then, and
barn.
as just a barn itself. And that slaughterhouse, and we'll go back to that because Ted and Bobby and them have asked about this. They had a smokehouse there, which was right to the west of the old barn, and they smoked meat. In other words, they had hams, and they had sausage, and they'd put it in there and build fires underneath there and smoke it. And of course, the smokehouse stayed there. When the slaughterhouse burnt, the smokehouse didn't burn. It stayed there, and that was the reason that they remember that as children, that it was there at one time.
Of course.
And during that period of time, after it burnt, my father, he and mother built them a little house there beside the tin barn. And there was a fella from over around Eunice that had a lumber company, and they came in there and brought all the lumber, and on the tin barn, they built that in one day. They brought.
How many people were there?
Well, there was 8 or 10 of them, and but anyway, they put it up. Of course, the slab and everything was still there. Right. Now, Ted and them asked about that. In the middle of that barn is a recessed area that's probably 10 by 10. That is just dirt, and that was where that they had a cooler that they hung all the meat in. I do not know why that was still dirt, except that maybe that was for drainage or whatever it may be, and I'm sure there was a floor they had a floor in that cooler, but undoubtedly it was of wood or of something that went away. But that's what was there where all that dirt is. It was a big cooler where they hung all the meat.
Gotcha.
And so.
And when was the smokehouse built? Do you remember the year?
Well, it was built at about the same time that the slaughterhouse was built, and that would be in the late 40s.
And did he use the smokehouse a lot? Did he use it often, or?
Well, they used it all the time because they're processing meat and delivering it to grocery stores, and so
they needed to. Yeah, that was a need there.
It was used a lot.
And that was in DeRidder and Lake Charles, the stores around. Okay.
Sanger and DeQuincy and places like small towns. Yeah.
Okay.
Sure was.
All right. What was the first tractor in the barn?
Well, I'm going to talk about first about how they took care of the place before there was a tractor there. Okay. And this is, you don't think about this, and probably that most of us hadn't thought about it till we got older, is that before, I got out of the service and started going down to the farm, and there was no equipment there, and I bought this old tractor, used Ferguson tractor, 30 horsepower. And but before that, they kept and it wasn't only him, but you think about all the other old people, or there wasn't old people, there were young people, kept up their place. You had sheep, you had cows, and you had goats. And they would take them and put them in a certain pasture and let them eat all the grass down. Then they'd move them to another pasture, let them eat the grass down there, while the other pasture was growing back. And so consequently the cows would eat the tall grass, the sheep would eat the grass that was closer to the ground, and they'd eat it down real close. And when they had bushes, they'd bring in goats because the goats would eat the bushes. And so that's how they kept everything clean. Nice. Until we got a tractor and started using it. Well, my father, he hadn't had a tractor, he thought that was the greatest thing in the world, and so at the time I had gone into practice, and I'd get up there on Wednesday afternoons and on the weekends, and so he called me one day and said, "I'm really having trouble with the tractor. The tractor is not running." I said, "Well," "you're going to have to wait till I come up here and take a look at it, and we'll try to find someone to fix it." And so it may have been 4 or 5 days or a week before I got up there. So when I got there, he said, "Well, I've been working on the tractor." I said, "Really?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, how's it going?" He said, "Oh, well, pretty good." Well, he had the tractor in the tin barn that we were talking about. And I go in there, and they drank Maxwell House coffee. And Maxwell House coffee comes in little gallon cans. Well, he had about 10 of those Maxwell House coffee cans with all the parts, small parts of that tractor in them. I said, "How do you know which can goes where?" He said, "Well, I can probably figure it out." I thought, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe this." I said, "Well, I don't believe that." I said, "We're going to have to hire somebody." But anyway, had to go hire somebody to put the tractor back together. And I told him, I said, don't be working on anything anymore now.
Oh my goodness.
And so, but anyway,
What a memory.
yeah, but that was
Yes.
he was trying to do something, but it really didn't work out.
It sounded like he was getting a lot out of it, though. So maybe, maybe he learned a little something.
At my expense.
Yes, yeah. Another topic that you have is the road to the farm. And the question is, where was the original roadway that led to the property? Do you remember where that?
Yeah. Well, the first thing is that the main road coming into the farm is called Hauser Road. And Hauser Road, at that time, it was just a plain dirt road. They didn't have a gravel on it. And when it rained, I mean, there were ruts, big time ruts on it, and where they had a hard time getting down the road. The road to the farm was on the west side of the property. There was a lane that went down to the west side of the property, and it went west a little bit and came up to where Leland Moses Road was. And that's the way that he first were able to get into the property. As time went on, the road that's in there now goes north. Well, there was a fence line, and Mr. D.T. Harrell owned one side of the fence, and Mr. Hauser on the other side of the fence. And so he got them to dedicate 15 feet on either side of the fence to put a road in there, and which they did. They dedicated that as a road, and so they put a road in then. Nice. And that's how it came.
And that's where it is now. That's how y'all get in there now. Okay. Interesting.
But at one time it was, I know when I was very young, there were times when it was a really problem getting there in the wintertime when it was wet.
Exactly. There's another question about the live oak trees leading into the property to the front gate. Did Papa plant that, or who planted it?
He planted those, and if I'm not mistaken, it probably him and Love may have planted them. I'm not sure, but it had to be planted in the very early 30s is when they were planted. And of course, they're gorgeous trees now, and they're live oaks. And my understanding was that they went out in the woods and dug these trees up and brought them there. And of course, they had to know what tree they were getting, because there's a number of oaks. You got live oaks, water oaks, and red oaks, and so the trees that they got were
all live oaks.
All live oaks, and they are gorgeous now.
Yes, they are. I saw a picture, and yeah, it's incredible, that image. Yeah, and also there was, I think, a question about the pecan trees in the pecan orchard. Who planted those?
Well, I think that the Frugiers planted those. Okay. They were planted early on, and going back to that time with the Frugiers there, that pecan orchard was sitting up on a hill, and the story was that they had about 150 head of cattle that were free range. That was in the free range down there. And every winter they'd get all those cattle up on that hill and feed them hay, and that's where they'd winter the cattle. The hill is a sandy soil, and it does not get wet up there. In other words, right now that even though you might have a heavy rain where you can drive around anywhere, but they picked that area where they'd feed those cattle, and that was in the early 1920s. You see.
That's amazing. Okay. And there's nothing like a pecan orchard whenever they're dropping, and you can go out there and get the...
Well, it is.
Cut them right there.
Very beautiful. We had the misfortune that the hurricane came and blew most of the trees down.
Which one, Audrey or Rita or...
Ted, what was the hurricane that blew the pecan trees down?
Rita. 2005, okay. 2000.
But anyway, that we still got a few left, but nothing like it was.
Nothing. Yeah, I understand. Yeah, darn hurricanes. But, okay, all right. What was grown in the garden in the front field by the front gate? Do you remember that?
I tell you what, I think that everything that he could grow was grown there. Of course, he was had an agriculture degree, and he loved that. He did not have anything to plow it with at that time, and so he had a horse and he had a plow, and that horse pulled that plow. But he planted everything: okra, peas, potatoes, corn, watermelons, and of course my wife and my sister Molly had the privilege of being able to put up some of that. And of course they would pick it in 5-gallon buckets, and of course they put up so much they got sick and tired of putting it up. But anyway, it was a lot of stuff was grown there, and because it was an area where the sandy soil, the soil was really good, and so everything really grew.
Just the perfect place. Yeah. Thank you for that. Another thing you put down was to list all the animals on the farm. Do you remember, besides sheep and cows?
Well, you had sheep and cows, and they had goats, and one of the big things that was guineas. They always had guineas, had chickens, and at times they had hogs. The guineas were a big thing because when you decide you'd like some guinea gumbo, well, you'd go out and shoot you a guinea, but you had to shoot that guinea in the head, so that you wouldn't spoil any of the meat, and then make the gumbo at it.
Yes. Yeah, you didn't want any lead shot in the body. You got to do it in the head. Yeah, I understand.
Well, most of the time had to shoot it with 22. So
okay, one. Boy, that's a good shot. Okay. What? Now I've heard of these, and I may have seen them, but there were dipping vats on the farm. What was that used?
Well, the dipping vats was back when they had sheep, a lot of thousands of sheep, and what it was, the sheep had ticks on them. They would cover the sheep, and so consequently the government came in, and the government put in the dipping vats to dip these sheep and to dip the cows to get all the ticks off of them. And so there was 2 dipping vats there. There was one dipping vat that was smaller, it was narrower, and that was for the sheep, and they had another one for the cows that was wider. But that was, the government did that, and they
paid for it and everything?
Yeah, that's right. They eradicated the ticks in the cows and the sheep by doing that. They required everybody to do that. That's what they did.
You remember what decade that was? Or?
Well, it had to be in the 30s and 40s. 30s and 40s, yes.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. And so.
All right. You mentioned something about wild horses. I had a student from South Dakota years ago who talked about wild horses there. I had no idea there were wild horses in Louisiana.
We had wild horses. In fact, I had a herd of about 40 or 50. And so they ranged on the open range south of our farm, between our farm and Ragley. And every summer, that was a big deal, is going around to those horses up and bringing them in, and they'd cut their manes and tails. And there was a man down here in Lake Charles that would make horsehair reins and ropes out of that horse hair. And then they would also keep, Papa would keep 2 or 3 horses around to break or to tame. And of course, he always had some, HL would bring some young black boys down, and they would ride them. And of course, Daddy's philosophy was that if 2 got on there at one time, they wouldn't buck as much. Well, that philosophy was not very good, because they would go in every which direction when they first started riding them. And so, but they'd eventually get them broke. And so, but we used to break our own horses. And
did you do that also?
I did that also, and it was good to see one. I had one really fine horse that a fella had given us. It was out of a mare that was a racehorse. He was a stallion, and that it was great to, whenever they go round the wild horses up, you could outrun the wild horses and turn them around. And but anyway, my uncle lived not too far from our farm, and he had some cows, and they were kind of wild, and so he wanted to get them up and pin them, and but he didn't have a way of doing them, so he asked my father if they'd come over, and so, but my horse had a bad leg, and I couldn't ride it, so I had another horse that I was training, and but the horse was what you call green broke. In other words, it you couldn't guide it very easily.
Oh yeah. Okay.
And so sometimes they'd go whichever way they wanted to go. And so we go over there, and he had a big pond. And so we got to running these cows. These cows were, I mean, they'd run in every direction. And so we was trying to head them off, and they had a little place in the pond that was real narrow on the end. And so the cows went around there. So I thought I'd just go across that little narrow place there, looked like it's about 6 or 8 feet wide. And when I did, the horse went off in there. And the next thing I look up, and all I could see was water. It was about 10 feet deep there. And so me and the horse came out of that fine, you see. But anyway, some of the experiences that you have on fooling with horses. But no, we had always had horses, shuttling ponies that Bobby and Jill, and I think maybe Ted and Nimrod, and of course Ted, my nephew, was a wild horse rider, and of course we have film of him being able to circle through the barn, ride around through the barn a number of times on a horse, but anyway he was a horse rider, and
I did not know that about his high school classmates, and okay. All right.
A friend of yours, and so Bobby and his sister we always had shuttling ponies, and they rode those, and they was always falling. It's amazing that, of course, they weren't that tall, but whether they all didn't get hurt falling off half the time, But anyway, another thing that I want to mention is that my father had these border collies. And he got a border collie male from a friend of his, and the dog was part border collie and part English shepherd, but it looked like a border collie, but it was really a nice dog and smart. And so he decided he would like to breed and raise some puppies. Well, he'd read in a magazine where that they had some registered border collie females in Tennessee, and so he ordered this border collie female from Tennessee and had it flown in down to Lake Charles, and then we went down there and picked it up and brought it back. And so he started raising border collies, and which are really great dogs. And anyway, the older dog was named George, and old George was a really nice dog. But anyway, at the time, I had cows down there, and we was always having to round the cows up. And so he tells me he had about 3 or 4 part-grown border collies there, and he said, "Well, I've been training my dogs." And he said, I said, "What you training them for?" He said, "I'm training them to round up the cows." And so I said, "Well, that's great." And he said, "You want me to show you?" I said, "Well, yes." I said, "I'd love to see that." So he lets those dogs out, and we walk out there, and he has a dog with him. He said, "Sick 'em." And all the dogs, they got to running those cows, and they're running all over the place. I said, "Oh my gosh, don't kill all my cows running with those dogs."
So they were just chasing them; they weren't rounding.
Well, that's right. They weren't old enough trained enough to round them up. We had a border collie out of that same group that was trained, and Bobby was young, and I guess maybe been 10 years old. But anyway, we had some cows, and we was up in front of our house there on the hill, and so I just said, "Well, go out there and round those cows up," and there was people there, and I was trying to show off, and in which I didn't think anything was going to happen. Well, he walks out there with the dog, goes out there and rounds the cows up and brings them up there and keeps them all in him. Here's the dog and Bobby's that got all the cows up there in a little circle, pinned up. But the dogs have so much natural instinct. Yes. And that particular dog, I had, like I say, 30, 40 cows, and I could work on them with just using that dog, because the dog would, you tell the dog to do something, and the dog was smarter than I was.
Yeah, the Border Collies are considered, I know, to be the top most intelligent canine ever. So yeah, I can understand that.
They were really good, but anyway, we always enjoyed the dogs and had dogs, and out of that, we had out of that group that my father had there. Then when he passed away, I had to disperse the dogs, and so I had a friend that lived in Lake Charles here, and so he said, I would like to have one of those dogs. I said, well, that's fine. So anyway, took the dog, and he lived out here southwest of town, and he told me one day, he said, the dog's running off. He said, I don't know what to do. And so he called me 2 or 3 days later. Well, he said, I found out what's wrong with the dog. I said, what's the matter? He said, well, said the school bus comes, and we have like a big circle out here, and said everywhere a child gets on the school bus, that dog goes and meets that school bus. And as a school bus goes from house to house, the dog goes from house to house. And then he doesn't come back home until the school bus is finished picking up the kids and goes to school.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
You think he was protecting the children?
No, I think he was they
just wanted to be there with the kids.
They like to be around, like to run.
Amazing.
and so.
Oh, that's wonderful. Special dogs, definitely. Wow. Okay. There's some other things here that you would, topics and stuff, not to completely change the subject, but sure. You wrote down about how was grass and weeds controlled on the farm. Well, that was the goats and everything and all. Okay, I got that. Okay. Okay. Now, we talked about this whenever I came in. 2 people. Probably many people in Louisiana know them, and many people from McNeese. Lether Frazier and Earl Long. Can you share with us?
Yeah, I will share some of that. And Lether Frazier was my father's first cousin. And so, and Lether Frazier he was president of McNeese. Yeah. And then after he was president of McNeese, he was lieutenant governor with Earl Long. Well, my father, he loved the politics, and he used to go around with them whenever they'd speak at the squares in each little town, and I'd hand out cards, and then they'd speak and talk, but anyway, at the farm, they had a barbecue pit with a barbecue shed. Well, they would end up a lot of times down there partying, having a party with Earl Long and Lether Frazier and some of the other senators. And of course, Love, he was the main cook, and he would always barbecue for them. And of course, they always had steak, and that was the thing, is having a good T-bone steak. And Love, he was very good at barbecuing, and so they were they would indulge in a little spirits and while they were down there partying, and so everybody was happy there. And so one night they were down there, and Love was barbecuing, and Earl Long, he was out at the barbecue pit, and Love said, Governor Earl, said, that sure is a pretty coat you have on there. Said, that jacket is really nice. And so Earl Long asked Love, said, Love, would you like to have my jacket? He said, yes, sir. Said, I sure would. He said, well, here, I'm going to give it to you. He said, turn around, let's try that jacket on. So they tried the jacket on. So Earl asked him how does that fit? He said, it fits perfect. Well, the only thing, the sleeves are about 4 inches too long, and the tail of the coat was down to Love's knees, but it was great. So, but needless to say that too long after that, Love told him, said, well, I've got to leave because I've got to go to town. Well, he had to go to town and show everybody that the jacket that Earl Long gave him. And of course, Love's name was Love Frazier.
Thank you.
And then Letha Frazier was his name. And so somebody said, well, look, Love said, you and Lieutenant Governor Frazier have the same last name. He said, yes, sir. I said, we're first cousins.
I love that.
And so, anyway, they had some really fine times there, and they had one fellow that was a senator from DeRitter. His name was Arsan Stewart, and Arsan was a real good friend of my family's, and Arsan, they kept talking about how good he could shoot a .22, and so we were down there one day during the day, and so they had a .22 out, and I said, well, look, why don't you show us how you can shoot that .22? He said, okay, well, flip a nickel up there. They flipped the nickel up there. I mean, he hit it. It was amazing.
Was it a pistol or a rifle?
No, it was a rifle. It was a rifle, and it was amazing how good he could shoot. But he could,
a nickel?
He could actually shoot as good as they said he could.
Right.
You know?
Yes. Yeah. That's amazing. Goodness.
As time went on, I built a house on the hill where the pecan orchard was and where they had fed these cattle. I talked about feeding cattle back in the early times, and so I had come back and gone into practice and did not have much money, and this was probably maybe the second or third year I'd been in practice, and was just getting started, and so I said something about it. I said, I sure would like to build me a little house. And so didn't think too much about it. So my father called one day and said, well, I got the lumber for your house. I said, oh, wait just a minute. I said, I don't have any money. He said, that's all right. I said, you can afford it. I said, how do you know I can afford it? You don't know how much money I have. He said, you can afford this. I said, well, how much is it going to cost? He said, it's going to cost $38. I said, well, undoubtedly you stole the lumber from somewhere. I said, for it to cost that. He said, no. I said, he went to Maryville, and on the outside of Maryville, they were taking down an old schoolhouse. And they had these big beams, and the beams were 12 by 6 by 24 feet long. And they were all stacked out there. And so he pulled in there, and there was a black man that was there working, and he said, who's in charge? And so the fellow said, I am. He said, well, I'm interested in these beams here. Said, are they for sale? He said, yes, are they for sale? He said, well, how much you want for them? And so the fellow looked at him, and he said, what's your name? He said, well, my name's Welborn. He says, $38. He said, how did you come up with the price from that? He said, it's more than 30. Are you making a joke out of this? He said, no, sir, I'm not. Said, I am really serious. Said, for you, it's $38. He said, why is it so cheap for me? He said, well, it cost me $38 to take the nails out, get the nails pulled out of all those boards. He said, and what? He said, well, you were county agent, and said, I just graduated from Southern with a degree in education, and said, I was trying to get a teaching job, and I couldn't get a job. And so said, I came to you and told you that I was married, and said, had a baby, and we were starving to death, and I needed some kind of job, and said, you got me a teaching job. And said, this is my payment.
That is
so
amazing.
Anyway, that's how I got the lumber from my house. You know.
What a wonderful moment.
Yeah.
That is just beautiful that he was able to pay him back somewhat. That's amazing. Thank you for those stories. My goodness.
Could we stop just a second?
Absolutely. Yes.
And let me, I got the list of stuff, and let me look at my list.
All right. So take two. Okay. So let's talk about the family gatherings at the farm. What do you remember about those?
Well, that was always a big deal. In other words, down through the years, that's what we did on the weekends. We went to the farm as a family gathering, and and this was, we'd all meet up down there, and my mother would cook, or Molly would cook, or my wife would cook, Pat would cook, and so consequently all the young people, they grew up going down to the farm gathering. We entertained a lot. In other words, Daddy and Mother, they entertained a lot down there whenever they come by. Whenever I was coming up, I was young, I entertained. Now Ted is doing the entertaining, and Ted he's moved the barbecue house over and has a barbecue shed, and he has people from Lake Charles and McNeese and different places up there entertaining them all the time. So down through the years, that's been a big focal point for the entertaining and our recreation is what it's been.
And there's something special about family gatherings and just that fellowship that you can build with that.
We'd have, I may have all of my family down there. My mother's relatives are Ted's side of the family, in other words. And
are they all around here? Or
well, a lot, yeah, most of them are around here, and that Ted and them are still doing that. They're still having family gatherings down there all the time. And so there was go ahead, was there another question?
Yeah, there was some questions about the family. During World War II, Molly, and that's Ted's mother, said Papa traded meat for other goods. What was going on?
Well, the thing is that during that time, people did not have much money, and so consequently, it was after that, during that latter years, he had a packing house, and he made a lot of mutton stew, cans of mutton stew. I remember he had cases of mutton stew. At one time and it may be after the packing house had burnt, that's what we ate a lot, mutton stew. But what Molly was talking about there, and that question is that he would trade mutton stew for other goods and other types of materials, you see.
Things that were needed.
Needed because people weren't able to buy it. So a lot of stuff was rationed during that time. Of course, yeah. And so that was a barter is what it was.
Okay. Another family question. Where did Papa and I guess Mama, Amy meet?
They met at Dry Creek, and he was undoubtedly they met when he got to be principal. He was principal at Dry Creek. His first, like I said a while ago, his first job was at Longville teaching, and his next job was at Dry Creek as principal of the Dry Creek School. And so undoubtedly that's where they met there, and because I guess he bought the farm in 27, and then they were married in 29. So it was right there
right around that time. Okay, that's okay. Thank you. There was one other question that I was given that I wasn't sure where to put. This might have nothing to do with the family, but who were the boys that Papa helped educate?
I do not know specifically who it was. I know that he was help other people before he helped his own family a lot of times. He was always trying to get somebody a job or helping somebody to do something, or he was trying to help in what I think that refers to. He was always trying to get somebody a scholarship because he knew Letha Frazier was early on. He was dean at McNeese, and then he was president, and so consequently that was a big thing through McNeese that he was helping people get jobs. Gotcha. And another little tidbit on when Daddy was principal at Dry Creek High School, that it was a time that was around the war or a little after the war, and all the guys that were in school, a lot of them had been to war, and so the students were older than normal. And when I went into practice, there was an older fellow that came in, and he said, "Well," said, "I knew your daddy." He said, "I went to school when he was principal at Dry Creek." I said, "Really?" I said, "Tell me about it." I said, "I don't know anything about it." He said, "Oh," said, "he was bad." I said, "Really? I has that?" He said, "Well," said, "they had a boiler room underneath the school," and said there was a lock on the inside of the boiler room. I said, on the inside of the ballroom. I don't get that. He said, yeah. I said, if you got in trouble, said he took you downstairs in the ballroom and locked the door, and then he gave you a whipping, and then when you got through, he unlocked the door and let you out.
My gosh. Tough love there. Goodness. Well, hopefully he learned the lesson. And
another little story about that I missed on the pack when they had the packing house, and they they'd bring the beeves or cows in there, and they had a place there where they'd shoot them and they'd roll them out on the floor, and then they had to butcher them on the floor. Well, they had a fellow named Jeff Harper, and he was from over around Dry Creek, just a country fellow that was in charge of everything. They had a fellow, the Charlie Stokes. Charlie worked on and off for Daddy, and so Charlie was there. He helped skin these beeves and the cows, and whenever they'd get ready to butcher them. And so they were there one day, and so they had killed a cow, and it out on the laying there to be skinned and butchered. And so Charlie and this other fellow were just standing there, and so Jeff, he said, okay, fellas, said, we need to get this done. And said they just stood there, and whether they were smoking a cigarette, which they could have been, because during that time everybody smoked. And so he said, I said that I need for y'all to get this beef skinned. And so Charlie, he was a very active individual, and so he said, well, no, so-and-so, and he cursed, so-and-so is going to tell me what to do. I'll do it whenever I get ready. He said, I said that you need to do it. And so he cursed Jeff again, and when he did, there was a hammer laying beside Jeff. It was a ball peen hammer. He just reached up and knocked Charlie on the side of the head and knocked him out, and told that other fella, said, okay, now you take Charlie and you drag him out there and put him in that hog pen. They had a bunch of pen with hogs in it. He said, well, you done killed Mr. Charlie. He said, well, the hogs will have something to eat now. And so anyway, right after that happened, when Daddy happened to drive up, and the other guy, the black fella, said he was pale. Said, and so Daddy asked him, said, what in the world, are you sick? Said, no, sir. Said, Mr. Jeff done killed Charlie and fed him to the hogs. And he said, well, let's go out there and see about him. So they went out there. Of course, Charlie was still alive because Jeff hadn't hit him that hard. Yes. So they got him up and washed his face off and brought him in there and revived him and said, how you feel, Charlie? I feel fine. Okay, well, you go ahead and skin that beef then.
Okay.
But Charlie he could do all kind of things. He was a wild horse rider. He would ride the wild horses. Yes. And so we had a mule it was a paint mule, and the way that we got around on the farm there was a wooden wagon. It had wooden wheels on it, and the box of it was wooden. And this mule pulled that wagon, and that was a big thing. And so one day we'd gotten a big load of wood and come back to the house, and Love had a wash pot out there where they washed their clothes in. They had built a big fire in this big wash pot. And so and the mule was pulled up there close to that wash pot, but Charlie got to bragging about he could ride anything. And so my father said, well, you reckon you could ride that mule? Said that mule hadn't got a chance. He said, well, I tell you what, let me take the harness off that mule and you just jump on it. Yes, sir, I'll do that. Well, anyway, he jumped on the mule, and the mule threw him, and he fell in Love's wash pot that was full of clothes, and Love hollered and said, you better get out of my wash pot because I'm going to kill you for dirtying my clothes up. So,
yeah, sometimes you get overconfident. And
so anyway, back to Earl Long. We got one more story on Earl Long, and one time Earl Long was down there, and so my mother was there, and it was during the day, and so she had cooked dinner for Earl Long. And so Ted's mother was there with him, and Ted's mother had told his story that they were sitting there, and so I don't know what they had. I'm sure they had a meat and a number of vegetables and what have you, and so they said, Governor Earl Long said, come on in here and sit down. And so he sat down, and they had a glass of water. Well, the first thing he did was took his false teeth out and put it in that glass of water and soaked them real good and said, well, I got to get my teeth good and clean before I start eating.
Oh, goodness. Guess he was very comfortable there.
Yeah, he was very comfortable. He didn't mind what he did, you know.
Oh, my
And so anyway.
Thank you for that. Okay. One of the last questions was, whose property had the natural spring over on the east side of Ray Hauser's home? Do you know who?
This was it was Longbelt. It was Crosby Chemical property. Crosby Chemicals. Longbelt had all of that land to the south of us and east of us, and then Crosby Chemical bought it because it had all these pine stumps on it, and they came in. They built a mill in DeRidder to process the stumps, which had rosin in it, and they made turpentine out of it. Well, over in that area, probably about 2 miles from our house, was what they call a spring. It was a hole in the ground about 3 feet wide, and there was water bubbling up in the middle of that. You could see the sand road. Sure. Well, it was a natural spring that water was coming there, and we used to go, excuse me, we used to go over there in that wooden wagon I was telling you about. We'd all get in that wagon and go over there and carry your food and have a picnic, and you, of course, drink water out of the spring and then play in the woods, but that was a big deal to go over to the spring and have that. I've never done it, but the water in the spring, it's pretty cool, right? Oh, it's real cold.
That's okay.
Real cold, and it runs off down to a little creek there. But as later on in years, whenever they drilled some oil wells to the south of there, and it appeared that after they drilled the oil wells, it must have relieved the pressure, but the spring didn't hardly run anymore after that. But when I was young, and when Ted and Diana and Cindy and Bobby and all of them were young, used to go over there.
Yes. Okay. And you mentioned early on when the Frugers had the farm, it was an open range and a lot of the trees were cut. Was there ever logging done on the farm?
Not that I know of. It was done early on, but it had to be before my father got it. And the thing is all the logging that was done was cut with a cross-cut saw and with a hand.
Two people
doing it. They had no mechanical equipment. And the trees, and there was another thing is that, and I'm not sure that the rest of the family knows, there used to be a railroad right south of the farm that went through there, and that railroad was there to haul the logs out. And of course, whenever they quit logging, they took the railroad up. But whenever I was growing up, there was still a place you can see where the dump was, where the rails were, on that.
All right. I have one question that I didn't get from your family, but did you or your family do any hunting out there? And what were some of the, if y'all did, what were some of the game that y'all?
Well, I did, and the big thing that early on when I was young, like me and Love quail hunted. We killed a lot of quail. Then there was times when there were doves there at times. Bobby and his friends, they hunted rabbits. There's a lot of rabbits around, and so we did a lot of rabbit hunting, and so that was primarily.
Nice. Okay. Thank you. That's what I have, Dr. Robert. Do you have anything else that you would like to? I mean, what you're doing this, to share all the stories that you experienced for your family. Is there something you would want to? 50 years from now, when somebody in the family's looking at this, is there anything you'd like to say to them?
Well, I think it's been great times for me. I've lived the best of two worlds. Having the farm, of course, I was practiced here in Lake Charles, and I was in an office all the time, and so consequently, it was a great outlet for me, and I think it's helped me stay alive a little bit longer. The rest of the family, they've enjoyed it, and I think that maybe at times they might have enjoyed it too much, because I know growing up, when I was younger, I demanded a lot of the rest of my family to go, and it was a lot of work that was put in on it, and so consequently, no, it was. I have good memories of it, and really enjoyed it, and I enjoyed getting out on the weekends and doing something outside.
Nature has a way of really doing some great things for you, and I'm glad that you allowed me into your home and shared all of this, and just very honored to be able to do this for you. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
But thank you, everyone. I hope you got as much out of it as I did, and we'll see you next time.